Tonight, on a can't-miss Localite, Jon Compton sits down with world-class kayaking superstar Tao Berman. Tao shares some big news both personally and professionally, and Jon discovers that Tao is nowhere near done with his world-class, record-breaking ambitions. All of that and more tonight on Localite.
Tao Berman, thanks for coming on.
Well, John, good having me.
Well, we're glad to have you here. It's great to, it's great, one, just to get to the opportunity to sit down and talk with you, but I want to know, too, some of the background, some of the stuff that brought you to the place that you're at. You came from some pretty humble beginnings. You want to tell me a little bit about that?
I really did. I mean, these days, when people read about me in the media, frequently they're seeing the glamour side because that's what the media loves to report. Mm-hmm. What they don't realize is really how unorthodox my childhood was. I grew up on a mountain with no running water, electricity, indoor restroom. In fact, my mother made some years as little as $4,000 with which to feed herself and her 3 kids. So I certainly learned from a young age that if I wanted something, I couldn't just ask her for it. If I wanted to see a friend, I couldn't say, hey, Mom, will you give me a ride to see my friend? We had no car. I had to walk. So I learned from a very young age that I had to be resilient and try and find a way to accomplish whatever it is that I wanted, as opposed to being able to rely on a parent. Little did I know how much that would help me in my career as an athlete.
So do you think your work ethic is more out of just necessity because of the way that you were raised? Or were your parents hardworking and really instilled that in you at a young age?
I think it was a combination of both. I mean, they certainly instilled it in me. We were incredibly poor, but it was by choice. My parents both came from very educated families. On my father's side, they're brain surgeons, lawyers, doctors, and scientists. I mean, very educated. My mother's side, a bunch of engineers. I mean, intelligent family. They just decided they wanted a different type of lifestyle. So I think there's a big difference between being poor because you have no other option and choosing that you don't want to subscribe to America's beliefs and standards and just, I guess, committing to the rat race. Yeah. They wanted something different.
They wanted something different. Were they hippies?
They were definitely. My father wouldn't say so, but they absolutely were.
Okay. So they were living off the land and the whole deal.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, when did the river and water and kayaking, when did all of that start to come into play? Was that at a young age too?
Relatively speaking, I was in 8th grade and I was getting into a bit of trouble, not because I was a bad kid, like a lot of boys, type A personality. You got an abundance of energy.
You're a type A?
Yeah, can you believe that?
I would never have guessed.
But in any event, yeah, I was in 8th grade, and my mom was always trying to introduce me to new activities because she felt I wouldn't be fighting anymore if I had a positive direction to focus my energy. And one day she said, hey, Tao, you want to go to the river and go down in an inflatable kayak? And, well, of course, as a 14-year-old kid, it sounded like a good idea.
Sure.
And when we got to the river, there was a sign that said we needed a helmet or we'd be ticketed. So we went to the local rafting company and rented helmets. And we're paddling down the river, and no sooner did we put on than we saw a sign that said, danger, rapids around the corner. And Mom's starting to question whether we should be taken off the river. At this point, we flushed around the corner, and we're going through the rapid, and I'm paddling towards all the biggest-looking features, and she's paddling away. And consequently, we're going down it sideways because we're paddling 2 different ways, and it was a fiasco. But and from that point on, though, I was completely hooked. I just knew I had to get my mom out of the boat.
You had to get your mom out of the boat.
Exactly.
And you did that quite successfully.
I did.
So when did you first compete? When did I first compete? Can you remember that first competition where you were like, this is what I'm doing? Yeah,
when I got into the sport, my initial love for the sport actually wasn't on the competition side.
Really?
It was pushing the extreme end of the sport. So I was competing, but I wasn't competing against other competitors. It was really whether I was going to live or die. That was the challenge. And my objective was to run the hardest whitewater that I could possibly find that I could do without killing me. And I'm pretty darn fortunate that I lived through my childhood. I definitely take bigger risks now than I did then, but I at least understand the risks and can better evaluate.
They're more calculated.
They're substantially more calculated than they used to be. So my first competition didn't actually come until later in my paddling career when I'd already set several world records on the extreme end, and I was looking for a new challenge.
So I read somewhere that somebody asked you before you were ready to, do some huge drop or something that what were the butterflies in your stomach like or something? And you actually were like kind of taken back by that, like, well, what do you mean? So is fear something that you have, but it's calculated? You don't have fear like the rest of us people?
It's a really good question. I think that to some degree fear comes from doubt. And if you just don't doubt yourself, clearly there's no reason to feel fear.
Where do you think that comes from for you? Where do you don't doubt yourself?
Well, it comes from my track record. So for example, for paddling, when I think back in my paddling career and all of the different drops, hundreds of them that I've done, many of them first ascents that, literally if I made a mistake, even if I was off by, say, a foot, I could drop 80 feet onto a rock, it could kill me.
Well, yeah.
But when I think back in my career, I've almost never made a mistake. And had I may not be sitting here right now. So because I've had such a high level of success, well, the natural byproduct of that is that I'm going to be extremely confident in my ability to continue having success. So it's definitely success is built on confidence, but if you don't, if you make a mistake, it could take you several steps back in terms of where your confidence really needs to be. So it's a constant challenge. And so far I've just barely been on the successful side of where I need to be.
Do you think people because obviously just the little bit that I know of you and the little bit I've talked with you, you embody confidence. Do people see that as arrogance? Do you
absolutely.
get people that are like, oh, he's just an arrogant guy?
Absolutely.
Does that bother you?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's just who I am. The reality is, to do what I do, dude, if you don't have confidence, you just wouldn't be successful. Let me paint a picture for you. We're at the top of the world record waterfall that I set back in, 1999 actually. I'm looking down 100 feet, and I'm just thinking about all the things that could go wrong. I could never climb into my kayak and go over a waterfall like that if I just didn't absolutely know with certainty. Not with certainty, but be at least confident enough to be willing to climb into my boat. So the reality is there's plenty of people that think I'm arrogant, I'm cocky, and I probably am a little bit. But if I say, oh, I'm going to go do that and I'm going to do it perfectly, you could easily say, well, he's cocky. But the reality is I'm going to go and do it perfectly, because if I'm not successful, I'm going to get hurt, or potentially even killed. So that's just part of the game. Some people love me for it, others hate me, and at the end of the day, I can sleep well at night. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, good for you. That's great.
Yeah.
So tell me then, when you're going over like the 98, was it 98 and a half feet?
98.4.
98.4, almost 98 and a half.
Right.
So when you were going over that, it took 2.4 seconds or something, that drop.
Right.
Where's your mind?
People frequently ask me what I'm doing during that moment. And it's really hard to explain unless you were there. Things are happening so fast. Like you said, I'm falling for 2.4 seconds. And there was a lot I had to do in that 2.4 seconds. It's really hard to think, okay, now I need to do my left stroke. Okay, now I need to brace on the right. Because at the moment I think I should have already done it 20 feet, back up the waterfall. So I've spent so much time in my kayak that the objective is that it's a trained reaction. So that before I climbed in my kayak, I could sit there with you and say, hey, John, this is exactly what I'm going to do the whole way down the waterfall. And then when I climb into my boat, just trained reaction takes over, and I don't even think about it. And then when we review footage after the fact, we could look at everything I did, and you would realize that it's absolutely exactly what I told you it was going to be before I climbed in my kayak. I don't even remember doing it. It's just a trained reaction. So my mind, I'm not even sure where my mind is, but it's just, basketball players might call it the zone, where it just works.
Yeah. Do you always have your drops and your tricks and things filmed so that you can go back and critique yourself?
Not really. It's
No?
usually filmed because they want to put it on television or make a kayaking movie, and it's really terrific for me to be able to then go and critique myself, look at what I did right, what I did wrong. But generally speaking, if I made a mistake, I know it. I don't need a video camera or a television to show that to me. Exactly. It's just interesting sometimes when I don't remember that moment in my kayak, but I look at it, on film, and I'm like, wow, that is exactly what I had intended to do.
Yeah.
Or sometimes, to take it a step further, I'll go out with my still photographer, Jock Bradley, and we'll do a photo shoot, and I'll run a 35-foot waterfall 5 times in a row. And he'll want me to do, have my paddle stroke, last stroke on the right, keep my fist down to not expose my face, and we'll look at each shot. And I mean, it's with, my paddle, even my paddle shaft is within like 5 degrees of every run before it. And, the thing about my sport, though, is that there is no margin for error. You can't just be successful 70% of the time.
Right.
I mean, I've ran, hundreds of drops that could kill me. You can't even just be successful 99% of the time and expect to be doing it as long as I have without being injured or dead.
Yeah. That 1% will kill you.
It sure can.
So, you guys, we'll be right back.
After the break.
But at the end of the day, if I don't have a goal, I don't have the tool that I need to motivate myself to train.